Okay, so in the last video, we spoke about some of the key basic decisions that you need to make as a firm before you actually do internationalize into your chosen target market. And just when you think those decisions couldn't get any more difficult, here comes the doozy, the granddaddy of them all. Which actual entry mode are you as your firm going to choose? And there are 6 broad options that you can select from when looking to enter a foreign market. Exporting, turnkey projects, licensing, franchising, joint ventures, or wholly owned subsidiaries. And as I say, choosing between them can be a very difficult decision. So we're going to go through each of them in turn here, and as I say, run through not only the advantages associated with each, but also some of the potential drawbacks and things that you will need to be aware of if you are looking at selecting any of them. Alright, let's start with exporting, as many firms in fact do when they look to first internationalize overseas. So exporting is a way to increase market size and profits. Of course, what we're looking at here is manufacturing something in your home market, so as you have done previously, but then looking to ship and export that overseas to be sold in a foreign country. So it's what we're tending to find in terms of a pattern here is it has been on the increase, and this is largely due to the reduction in those trade barriers that we've spoken about previously with organisations like the WTO and regional economic integrations like the EU and NAFTA, the TPP and so on. These key attempts to basically make it easier to trade on the international scale have meant that exporting is becoming an increasingly popular option. So many large firms proactively seek new export opportunities, whereas with a lot of the smaller firms it's tend to be more reactive. So often they will see their sales starting to slow down and they start thinking, okay, well, we need to continue to grow, we're going to have to look overseas, whereas many of the larger firms are actually a bit more proactive, and even before their sales are peaking or slowing down, they are looking for additional opportunities to exploit. And as I say, exporting is a great way to do that. So they're not intimidated by the difficulties and complexities of exporting, or indeed any international activity that many smaller firms may face. So if your firm does choose to export when it's expanding overseas, it'll firstly need to identify market opportunities. You can't just say, okay, well, we're going to export and it will be successful. You need to identify, in line with some of the previous questions in the last video, where is going to be an advantageous market to expand into via exporting? Where are there opportunities for growth, potential niches that haven't been explored, or populations who are yet to be catered for by firms like yours? So you need to identify where is going to be appropriate first. You need to deal with foreign exchange risks. Some of the later entry modes that we'll look at in this week involve the establishment of actual operations overseas. So you'll manufacture something over there. But when you, as with exporting, continue to manufacture in your home country and then send that product overseas to be sold, then you then become subject and have to deal with foreign exchange risk. And we're going to talk in more detail next week what that will involve in terms of the monetary policy and foreign exchange market. But understanding that currencies are different from one market to another, and you will then be subject to fluctuations in those currencies, which can make it quite profitable or potentially quite difficult to make money via exporting. These are the sorts of things that you will have to encounter as an exporting firm. You'll need to navigate import and export financing. Usually you'll have to have an intermediary, a third party rather, somebody to actually be the person to receive the goods and then sell them overseas. So there's a lot of finance involved with hiring these people, contracting these people, and working out the details. And also, of course, import quotas and these sorts of things are also common hurdles that you'll have to overcome as an exporter. And finally, you'll need to understand the challenges of doing business in the foreign market, as we've spoken about previously. While you might not be looking to establish actual operations over in your foreign market, you'll still need to have an understanding of things like consumer preferences and tastes. What do people actually want in their products overseas, so that you can potentially cater for those preferences, as we spoke about with our strategies last week with the the multi-domestic strategy, where you modify or adapt your products to suit those different preferences around the world. So understanding the challenges here is crucial to success with exporting. We've got a couple of company examples who've done very well, actually Australian firms who've done very well through exporting. BHP Billiton are a massive mining company based here in Australia, who of course export their oil-based products and other related mining materials all over the world, with many mines here in Australia as well as overseas too. And then there are our friends at Foster's, the Australian beer company who became so famous they even got an appearance on Simpsons. You know you've made it when you get to that stage. And certainly the great S.K. Warne has always expressed a preference for Foster's when he was playing over in England. They're a fascinating case, Foster's, because here in Australia they're actually not particularly popular at all. Certainly if you go to a pub here in Australia, not many pubs or venues will actually stock Foster's beer. But if you go to almost anywhere in the UK, for example, everyone will associate Australian beer with Foster's. It's very popular, much more so, oddly, to an extent, than in its home market itself. So exporting has been a key ingredient to Foster's success, because certainly without it, they're likely to potentially even exist, let alone be so successful. There are some advantages and disadvantages to understand here with exporting. If we look first at the positives, it does help avoid the cost of establishing the local manufacturing operations which are necessary with some of the other forms of entry modes like wholly owned subsidiaries. So you're not having to pour massive amounts of financial resources and also time and effort into establishing actual physical, tangible operations overseas. So it is often a preference for firms which are first timers in terms of their expanding rather overseas. It's an easy sort of way to sort of ease yourself into internationalization. It also helps the firm achieve experience curves, location economies, and also potentially economies of scale here. So obviously, as you expand through exporting, you don't have to go all in. It is on a lesser scale, looking back to our previous video, but it does give you an ability to learn from that overseas exposure. So it helps with the experience curve, and also means that you can potentially take advantage of knowledge gained from that particular location where you are exporting to. By exporting, it also means that you can manufacture whatever it is that you manufacture or produce in larger quantities, which in theory should allow you to take advantage of economies of scale as well. On the downside, there may be lower cost manufacturing locations around the world. So of course, exporting means that you continue to manufacture in your home country. If you're an Australian firm, we have comparatively high labour costs and other fixed costs here in Australia. So by continuing to manufacture here in Australia and then export that produce overseas, you may be foregoing cheaper manufacturing locations around the world. There's also the issue of high transportation costs and those barriers to trade like tariffs and import quotas, which can make it uneconomical and not particularly profitable. So it, of course, especially again if you're an Australian firm, if you're looking to ship something to the US or to Europe, that's literally on the other side of the world. So getting it there from Australia to that part of the world might cost a lot of money. And then you do have to, as an exporter, deal with these barriers to trade. Import quotas, as we've spoken about, limit how much you can export to a certain country. Your government may have imposed voluntary export restraints, which will again provide a cap to the same effect. Tariffs will make your job in that foreign market much more difficult by making your pricing less competitive. So these are things that can be bypassed by other entry modes, but not by exporting. Then there's the issue of agents in the foreign country, and we're not talking about these type of agents. Distributors are the people here in focus, and they don't always act in your best interest, is what we've found. That a lot of the times they will have their own agendas, and they will be looking to make a profit from this operation, just as you are. So you're likely to have contracted them, and they'll have to abide by that contract. But whether they take that to the letter of the law and potentially even violate that contract is often difficult to control and police. So you do need to be aware of the dangers and risks there as well. If you are looking to and try and ensure greater export performance, you can seek assistance as an exporting firm here in Australia through a number of different channels. So there's government support such as Austrade, who are literally set up to help exporting firms here in Australia. There are numerous information sources, Trade Commission reports, there are commercial banks and accounting firms who are very, very happy to help you out there, of course, usually for a fee. And then there are export management companies who do the same sort of thing, who literally exist to specialise in assisting exporting firms achieve their goals overseas. Just following on from some of the key points on the last slide, there are a number of common pitfalls or mistakes and traps that people fall into when they look to export, especially for firms who are first timers. And it's important to understand a number of these if you are looking to export. Poor market analysis is a key issue. Firms often don't actually put enough research and effort into investigating what the market will be like when they do actually look to expand through exporting to that country. Having a poor understanding of the competitive conditions in line with this it is also a key issue. Lacking that customization necessary for the local preferences is a common mistake. Again, if you're adopting a global strategy instead of a multi-domestic strategy, then that's usually not a great recipe for success as an exporter, unless you're looking at more of a commodities-based industry. If you're looking at something like consumer goods, you do need to understand that you're likely going to need to customize or adapt or modify how your products are packaged and their features and so on to suit the local market conditions overseas. Having a poor distribution program is another key issue here. Again, going back to that issue of the agent, if they're not looking after or at least even gaining the necessary reach and exposure that you're after, that will severely inhibit your ability to perform well as an exporter as well. My favourite are the poorly executed promotional campaigns that just don't quite translate, literally in some cases, when you expand through exporting overseas. We've got a few examples here. AMC Motors, when they expanded overseas and sold their car, the Matador, into some Spanish-speaking countries, didn't realise that that actually translated to killer. So not many people wanted to drive around in their AMC Killer. Not surprisingly, they didn't understand that though when they looked to export it. The famous pen brand, Parker Pens, when they looked to export their pen products overseas, they came up with a slogan or a motto that was supposed to say, "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you," which is a fair point, of course. High quality pens, everyone gets the message, except when their distributors overseas did come up with that, effectively what was a rough translation for that, it ended up basically saying it won't leak in your pocket and impregnate you. Not quite the same after all, was it? We also have the example of Coors Beer, who have had for a long time the slogan of "Turn it loose," or Coors, turn it loose. When that was translated into Spanish, it actually basically meant get diarrhea. Not ideal, of course. So you need to make sure that when you're running promotional campaigns, especially for the same motto that you have in your home market, it does actually translate. So going back to our list, there are also problems associated with securing finance. A lot of firms, especially the smaller ones, do underestimate how much it will actually cost. Sure, it might be cheaper than some of the other entry modes, but it is still a significant undertaking. There's often a general underestimation of the differences in expertise required to actually be successful in that foreign market, as well as especially the amount of paperwork and formalities involved. Any form of international expansion is going to require a lot of paperwork and a lot of signing of documents, and a lot of small businesses, as I say in particular, underestimate exactly what is going to be involved in that respect.